I am so excited for our chat this afternoon. My guest on the program this afternoon is the youngest person to fly solo around the world. He's the author of the book, Born to Fly. He's one of Australia's 50 greatest explorers and a paraplegic plane crash survivor. I can't think of a better person to talk about overcoming adversity, navigating change, and building a better future. Are you ready for this? Y'all ready for this? Well, as you know, when you get on a plane, you got to put on your seatbelt. So let's put on our seatbelts.
It took 2 years of planning, training, and fundraising, over $250,000 on a laptop computer to be ready to even attempt the record. 24,000 nautical miles, 35 destinations, 15 countries. A normal Aussie teenager in a rented single-engine aeroplane. We had made aviation history. We'd definitely broken a few records. We had done so through being a big, united team. I jumped on the Australian speaking circuit, continued to share the message of the flight. We even published a book called Born to Fly, and we sat back and watched the journey as that book went on to spread and inspire both young and old. A whole bunch of wild things were happening in my life. I ended up standing somehow face to face with Prince William, having a conversation about aviation and adventure. I remember thinking at that moment, how on earth did I end up in this position? But I was reminded pretty quick that I was still a normal Aussie kid when I didn't want to touch any of the funky food at the reception and ended up overdressed at KFC instead. Whatever the story from after the round the world flight, it was safe to say that life was pretty good. On December 28th, 2015, that all changed. An engine failure on takeoff in a vintage biplane. A horrendous plane wreck. I was airlifted to hospital as the only survivor. Shattered from head to toe, 5 breaks in my back, no feeling or movement from the waist down, and diagnosed a complete paraplegic. At age 21, I'd been given an unbelievable opportunity to compare the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, a journey of discovering where we truly learn. 6 months in hospital, a year and a half in rehabilitation, and an unbelievably long journey back to not only walking, but flying.
Welcome to my favourite place in the whole wide world. Welcome to the sky, and in particular to Doug's the Cub, the very aeroplane that allowed me to get back in the air after my accident and a spinal cord injury. We're up here today, bouncing our way across the Tennessee hills, recording a story for the virtual keynote. But we wanted to take a moment to ask you again what the biggest challenge is that you are navigating right now, and how are you continuing to bring value to your individuals around you, be it an employee, a client, or a member. If we can help do that in any way, shape, or form, reach out. We'd love to jump on a call and talk further.
Welcome aboard, Ryan Campbell.
G'day, Coz. Thanks for having me.
Good day, mate. It is so good to have you on here. I like I said in my introduction, since we booked you, I've just been so excited to share some time with you. My son-in-law is a pilot for Delta. My nephew, private pilot. I learned how to fly when I was 21. So I have a little bit of airplane fuel in my bloodstream, but I just think you have an amazing story, just learning to fly when you were so young and what you did, but then how you've come back through such adversity is absolutely inspirational. But before we dive into your past a little bit, let's understand what you're doing right now. So you've made a move from Australia to the US. Tell us about that.
100%. So I've been living in the States for about 2 years, moved here specifically to launch a speaking business, to bring my Australian-based speaking stateside. And I could live anywhere I wanted in the whole wide world. I could live anywhere I wanted in the US as long as I was near an airport. So I now live in the Nashville area, halfway between Nashville and the Jack Daniel's distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, and that was not a coincidence. So I am based here in the US and speaking on, as you said, Coz, navigating change, overcoming adversity, and building a better future. And now, obviously, spending a whole bunch of time in my office and delivering virtual keynotes, getting excited for the moment that the live in-person events do return.
Well, I remember starting my speaking career 30 years ago, and we didn't have the technology that you have now. And I can't think of a more interesting time to start doing what you're doing than now with COVID there. So by you being poised to be able to jump right on and do great virtual sessions, you're further ahead than most. So I wish you all the best as you get going with your ventures here in the United States.
I appreciate it. It really is. I think a lot of people jumped and shied away from virtual, but reality is that it's actually, in a way, it's unbelievably exciting. And there's a whole bunch of things that we can now do virtually that we cannot do in person. And, we've worked with everyone from small groups and 8-minute presentations to 90-minute presentations for Fortune 100 companies. And we're able to interact, we're able to deliver content and stories from the aeroplane. And, we really are excited, I suppose. And I think we're going to see live events come back, as you would know, but we're going to see virtual hang around. So I'm excited to be in this position where one day we'll look back as 2020 will be the year that virtual really made a stand. So I'm excited to help and deliver content any way we can. That's what matters.
Absolutely. And nothing will ever replace the sight, sound, motion, and emotion of a live event. But in the meantime, virtual's definitely here to stay. We've had to retool ourselves for a lot of this, but I'm glad to know that you're prepared and poised to do this. So let's talk for just a second about what you talk about within organizations, because there are a lot of people from my network who'll be watching, and give them a little preview of what you do virtually right now and then what you will do on the platform. And then we're going to go back and learn about being born to fly.
Absolutely. No, well, one of my favorite things in the whole wide world is storytelling, good old round the campfire Aussie storytelling. And I really believe in it as a way to transport a message and a way to make a message memorable. So we use a lot of storytelling. We share all the moments from a 24,000 nautical mile solo flight around the world, breaking a world record, creating history, becoming the youngest person to have ever done so. But we talk about a plane crash. We talk about the moment my life changed, and it became unbelievably hard, and diagnosed a paraplegic, 6 months in hospital, faced with this long journey back to not only walking but flying. We dive right into change itself. We talk about overcoming adversity. We talk about navigating change, and we most importantly discuss how having the right tools to make that happen also allows you to build yourself a better future. And right now, I think with COVID, not only do we have to work through adversity that we are experiencing, not only do we have to navigate the change that we are right in the middle of right this second, but we have to focus on the rebuild, and we have to focus on the recovery, and how do we take this experience and use it as fuel to build a better future, to come out of this bigger and better and stronger, more resilient, and more ready to tackle whatever comes next in the way of tough times, because it's guaranteed. We have all experienced adversity. We are experiencing it now, and we will experience more. So we're all about storytelling. We're all about the 3-step checklist of navigating change, the mindset toolbox, the ways in which organizations and individuals can bounce back and be even better in the future.
And for you watching, the lower third does not have a typo.
Yeah. For those watching, I always say to people, it's ryancampbell.co, not .com. I can't afford the M yet. That's what I need you for. So right now it's .co. So I think I've got to find a famous cricketer to get the M, but it's definitely .co.
That's awesome. No, that makes sense. Came from an international domain server somewhere.
It did.
All right. So take us back. When did you know you were born to fly?
I was 6 years old, and I went on my first ever overseas trip and first ever aeroplane ride. And I was with my family, my mom, my dad, my 2 older brothers, and we jumped on a Boeing 737 and we headed out across the Pacific Ocean to an island called Vanuatu. And it was actually the first overseas trip my mum and dad had ever been on. So as a family, we were off on this wild adventure. I remember taking off out of Sydney and climbing up above the houses and being blown away as a 6-year-old kid, and not just the fact that everyone's roof was red and how many houses there were in Sydney, but the fact that we could fly through clouds. I think at 6 years old, I had no idea. I had no ability to even imagine that we could actually reach and touch the clouds. And from that day on, that was it. I was 100% committed to this idea of becoming a pilot. And it remained with me all through my childhood, my school years. And I found myself at 14 years old concocting a plan as to how I could get my pilot's license. I used a whole bunch of common sense, which what I thought was common sense at the time was that I would need to go and get a job in order to be able to fund my flying lessons. And I would need to at least have a driver's license before I started. It was an age issue for me. And one day I was walking through the kitchen at mum and dad's house, and I sat down and started to read the local newspaper that was just sitting there idle. And I flicked to an article about a kid who had flown an aeroplane for the very first time solo, all on his own, on the day that he turned 15. I was beyond jealous. I don't even think jealous or envious is a word to even begin to describe how I felt. I read that article over and over again, blown away that this was even legal. Every time I'd get to this guy's name, I'd replace it with mine. I was determined. I had that if he can do it, why can't I attitude? And I was determined to fly solo on my 15th birthday. So that was the first big goal that I set in life, all thanks to that one moment at 6 years old, flying a 737 out to an island in the Pacific.
How did you fund your flying lessons?
Well, my dad was the milk.
Anybody that knows about this, it's not cheap. So.
And it isn't cheap, and it's something that a lot of people look towards and think, oh, you must have money. But one of my, I suppose, biggest push that I had, the message that I wanted to share throughout the round the world flight was that anyone can fly. And I was 14 years old. My mum was a stay-at-home mum. My dad was the local milkman. And I took not only one after-school job at a supermarket, but I started to wash trucks on the weekends. So between those two jobs, I had about $10 more than I needed every 2 weeks to be able to go and fly and complete an hour flight training. So every 2 weeks, I would complete an hour, and that added up. And over time, I found myself in a position just prior to my 15th birthday where I was actually ready to fly solo. So it was funded through hard work, to be honest.
Well, it means a lot more to us when we have to work for it. So kudos to you. Tell us about your first solo. Where was that at, and what were you experiencing?
That's just, and I think as a pilot, you understand this, and anyone out there who is a pilot or knows one will understand that the day you fly an airplane on your own is one of the most special moments you'll ever have in your life. And so for me, it was my 15th birthday, and I had woken up obviously nervous and excited, checking the weather. And I climbed into the airplane with my flying instructor, and we took off and we went for a fly that morning. I landed still unsure whether he was ready to get out or not. We taxied back, and I could see my mum, my dad, and all my family sitting waiting. And my flight instructor climbed out. He buckled his belts back up, and he took his headset with him, and he looked at me and said, "Have fun. Don't forget to lock the door." And he shut that door, and I locked it, and I taxied out to the end of that runway. And the will and the belief you have to have in yourself at 15 years old to push that throttle in and know that once you're in the air, you have to get this thing back on the ground. It was a phenomenal moment. And I took off and I flew around. I landed. I actually did 3 takeoff and landings that day. And I landed, and I was excited. My dad was excited. I think my mum was stressed beyond belief, but I had successfully flown solo on my 15th birthday, really achieving the first large goal that I'd ever set for myself, which was a real, I suppose, motivator to continue on and push towards bigger and better things.
Yeah, you're right. There is something about being in a single engine airplane all by yourself. You're not pulling over. If something goes wrong, you're not pulling over to the side of the road and nobody's there to bail you out. It's all on you. And the 100%. Sooner we learn that no one is coming to the rescue, the better. What a great lesson for life.
And a great lesson for a young guy too, and when you think about the idea of a 15-year-old kid being given that responsibility. I was 16 years old, and I was flying my friends and family around. I had a license that allowed me at 16 to take passengers. But in Australia, you have to be 17 to drive a car on your own. So all my buddies at school who were 17, we'd cut a deal where they drove me from school to the airport. I would take them flying, but they had to drop me off at home. So I think a real formative point of life, that 14, 15, 16, 17, I was given responsibility and a lot of reward through learning to fly. And I would encourage every young guy and girl out there to grab their pocket money and head for the airport, because even if you don't pursue a commercial career, to be able to jump in a flying machine and take off, watch the sunset and see the world from just a completely unique perspective is just powerful. It is unforgettable.
Yeah, there's just no way to describe what it's like from 10, 15,000 feet up there. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. I remember my first cross-country solo trip. It's one of those where everything could have gone wrong and it could have been disastrous, but you somehow make it all work out and you get back to tell another story about yet another flight. So tell us about preparing, though, for flying around the entire globe. When did that vision first pop into that little head?
Well, I think it's the first time my head's ever been called little, so I appreciate that, Coz. But for me, at 15 years old, I'd been shown what I could do if I set a goal and worked unbelievably hard to make it happen, what we can achieve with a little courage and commitment. But I'd also been given this urge to want to achieve everything I could at the youngest possible age. So at 16, as I mentioned, I was flying my buddies around. At 17, I had a private pilot's license. And at 18, I had a commercial pilot's license just as I left high school. So I had graduated later in life to washing dishes at a local restaurant, earning better money. So I was flying more often. And at 17, I had this wild, crazy idea, again, through seeing an article about a kid who flew solo around the world. I had this crazy dream to want to become the youngest person to have ever achieved that. In 2008, the world record was 37. So it was safe to say there really wasn't a record that was age-related. And an American man broke it in 2008, and he was 23. So I was 17, not phenomenal at mathematics, but smart enough to know that I had 6 years to make this happen. Now, the coolest part about it was not necessarily knowing that I wanted to do it, but how I went about it. So I actually did what any wannabe 17-year-old adventurer would do, and I Googled how to fly solo around the world. And I actually found a website called earthrounders.com, and you can check it out. That was the first website I ever landed on. And I printed off all the information there was. There wasn't a lot of information, but that was to be expected, given that at that point, more people had been to space and flown solo around the world. So I printed off that information. I actually hid it in my bedroom at 17 years old. I didn't want my mum to find it. I didn't want my dad to find it. I didn't want anyone believing that I could actually achieve this. It was just kind of a pipe dream in the back of my mind. After reading those same 5 articles over and over again for a few months, I decided I wanted to take it a step further. So I Googled a very famous Australian entrepreneur, businessman, aviation adventurer. He'd flown around the world a number of times, a very, very famous household name. I Googled his email address and I sent him an email. And I said, "Dear Dick Smith, my name's Ryan Campbell. I am 17 years old and I want to become the youngest person to fly solo around the world." It was his reply that changed everything for me. He told me it was dangerous. It was unbelievably expensive. It had never been done before. He listed a whole bunch of limiting factors or hurdles to climb over. But at the end of the email, he gave me 5 words. He said, "But it can be done." And that's all I needed to hear. Now, I gained the support of Dick Smith, and although that was phenomenal at the time for a 17-year-old kid, the bigger problem was that my parents didn't know. No one else knew. So I had to go back to my mum and dad, and I ended up washing the dishes one night, which I think helped. And I sat down, I said to dad, and I said to mum, "What would you say if I said I wanted to fly solo around the world?" And their responses were that of a parent who'd heard a lot of dreams in their time. They said, "Oh, you'd see some wonderful things. That'd be so exciting." But it was when I sat a folder of emails down from Dick Smith, someone who they'd grown up watching in the media. It's when I put that folder down that they went, "Wow, this isn't a joke anymore." And that started what was an unbelievably long 2-year process of not just planning, preparing, and training as a pilot, finding an airplane to rent, which is hard at 17 years old to convince someone to let you take the airplane and fly around the world. But fundraising $250,000 on a laptop computer, we were just a normal Aussie family. And we were trying to achieve something that had never been done before. And for me, the 2 years prior to the flight, even though the flight itself was amazing, that's what I'm most proud of, was pulling together as a team and then gathering support from an industry and then just the world around us to be able to even climb into that airplane at 19 years of age and be ready to attempt the record. So I think that day flying solo at 15 really, lit a spark inside of me, and it placed me in a position at 19 to attempt history. So
I can't even imagine the logistics. 24,000 miles, 24,000 nautical miles. How many different legs did you have to fly?
We had 24,000 miles. We had 35 stops, and we had 15 countries. So we had the shortest leg was 20 minutes, and the longest leg in an airplane designed to only fly 5 hours before it ran out of fuel. A legitimate single-engine, 4-seat aircraft. The longest leg was 2,160 miles over water, and it was 15.0 hours nonstop. So we had 160
hours,
15 hours nonstop. That was Hawaii, Hilo, Hawaii to Van Nuys, California, the longest ferry leg in the world.
Oh, I just got chills you saying that. And what aircraft
might
were
be a
you
good
flying?
idea at the time, I tell you. We took the airplane, we removed the back seat, and we placed a 160-gallon bladder of fuel inside the cockpit with me. So my shoulder was up against a 160-gallon bag of fuel. So we had 252 gallons in a single-engine airplane. We were taking off overweight. I could not climb up the rear step of the aircraft because it would tip up on its tail. It had so much weight in the back of that airplane. I had to climb up over the front of the wing and climb in, and then it was a constant job to transfer that fuel during the entire leg. So we had an airplane that took 15 hours to cross that last leg of the Pacific, but only had 16 and a half hours of fuel. So a really, fine little project to manage.
There was not a lot of margin for error.
There wasn't a lot of margin for error there, and in a number of areas during the flight. The leg before that longest leg, we had a 60,000-foot thunderstorm that went from in the intertropical convergence zone, a band of bad weather that moves up and down around the equator depending on the time of the year. We took off out of a place called Christmas Island, where I had avgas or aviation fuel shipped to 3 months earlier in drums. And I landed at this little coral atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and loaded that fuel on board. And then I took off for what was a really long 10-hour leg to Hawaii. And as we become airborne, San Francisco air traffic control said, "Hey, champion, you've got a thunderstorm on your direct track to Hawaii." But I was on an island in the Pacific that hardly had telephone, so I couldn't find a great source of weather. And that was a satellite phone at that. So I found myself in a position airborne. I needed to get to Hawaii. If I landed back in Christmas Island, not only could I not land for 6 hours because I had to burn the fuel off to get the airplane light enough, but I also had no fuel there for the next 3 months until they shipped more fuel. So the flight would have just stopped. We ended up flying 180 nautical miles right of track, which that was just to get around the core of the thunderstorm. This is a kid who, every time I went flying or we conducted that navigation flight, that first flight somewhere that you were talking about earlier, a lot of the flights that you and I would have gone on were 180 miles.
Sure.
I was flying 180 miles right of track just to get around the storm to make it to Hawaii. So whether it was that or icing over the North Atlantic or, bribery and corruption in Greece and Egypt, it was a constant, not only adventure, but logistical nightmare the entire way around, to be honest.
And was there anybody else on the ground following you? I mean, obviously you didn't have a team in the air. You were solo, but I'm just trying to understand, did you have people that were meeting you at these stops and sending you off and then checking in with you? Or you left Australia and then...
We had a team. We had a great team. So we had a very good risk management plan in place. And we knew, for example, if I took off from Muscat, Oman, and I flew to Sri Lanka, to Colombo, Sri Lanka, if I was to have an engine failure at that point, I was to not I was actually to turn off the emergency locator transmitter in the aircraft because of the pirate activity in the waters. They would get to me faster tracking that emergency locator transmitter than the emergency services would. So we had a plan B in place for that leg, but we had this risk management plan that was top notch for a family that and a large team that did not have the money to pay other people to do it. So we truly drew I flight planned 24,000 miles on paper charts. I drew with a highlighter every route that I was going to do around the entire world. So we had a plan in place. We did have my mum and dad drop into England and Los Angeles and the world's biggest air show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. So I had familiar faces, but from a flying element, especially out in the Pacific where you just can't speak to anyone or across the North Atlantic, you are definitely on your own at that point.
So the biggest leg was from Hilo, Hawaii to Van Nuys, California.
Yeah.
Was that on your... So you went from Australia to the east and around the world that way?
Yeah. So if we jump into full screen real quick.
Yes, please. Let me take you to full screen, and you are the pilot in command, my friend. You're flying left seat. Here you go.
I'll throw this up there. Can you see that there, Coz?
You betcha.
All right, so the start here, arrow down at the bottom, was around Sydney, Australia. And what happened from that point on was a northeast leg over water to North America. So you can see the island hopping all the way across the Pacific Ocean. And that leg where the aircraft is sitting to the right of track, that Hawaii to California leg, that's the longest of the entire trip. We then went across the US, which is just a whole lot of fun. One of the places that I actually landed is a small town that I live right by now here in Nashville. We then headed up into Canada and then across the North Atlantic, a really dangerous crossing, very cold temperatures, Canada to Reykjavik, Iceland, then back down into Wick, Scotland, in order to make that crossing a success. From there, we went Scotland to England, France, and Greece. I was meant to end up in Egypt, but there was a crisis in that country at the time. So I ended up diverting around Iraqi airspace to descend over the Red Sea and land in Aqaba, Jordan. Before then, leaving Jordan, 9 hours across Saudi Arabia to Oman. Then we have that leg with the pirates from Oman to Sri Lanka. Another leg across to Malaysia, down to Indonesia. And then the last overwater leg that took me into the west coast of Australia. So that gives you a little bit of an idea as to the route. And then when I arrived in the west coast of Australia, that was the first time in my life I'd actually ever flown across my own country. So that was exciting.
Where did you find the faith?
I was naive. I was bold and courageous.
Fair.
And
That's
I was
fair.
young. And the more I live my life, the more I look back and think, wow, that was bold. But I also draw fuel and inspiration from 17-year-old Ryan, who wanted to take that on. And I remember writing Born to Fly, the book, and in the epilogue, I think it's the most powerful chapter of the whole book, because I sat there and said, I know that what I've done was cool and unique, and that was fantastic. Whatever path I take next, whatever road I choose, and that's all life is. We're just, it's a whole bunch of choosing which road to jump on. I wrote that I hope whatever the next road that I jumped on was the right road. And it took me to somewhere phenomenal, somewhere where I could continue to help and inspire, encourage, and be there for other people. And it's been a wild ride to get to this point, as we'll no doubt talk about. But as a speaker, as someone who has lived through a lot, who can help others work through adversity and change, I'm pretty certain that at the end of that round the world flight, I chose the right road.
I'm just in awe. I look at that map and just think that we could break that down and spend a day talking about the various legs and the people experiences you must have had, and just your interactions with the different governments to get permission to do things. I just think it's just absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. You could put together the logistics of that. You worked hard to fund it yourself, and you did it.
Yeah.
And as spectacular as that is, I mean, that in and itself could be a story that will propel you for the rest of your life because you overcame a lot of obstacles, but it only prepared you for overcoming greater adversity. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think, when we deliver a keynote, we talk so heavily. We love to share the story of the round the world flight, and there's so many moments in that were life-changing moments. But what we love to really make sure that we instill in the audience is how good my life was when I arrived home. So I wrote a book called Born to Fly. I went on the Australian speaking circuit. I met phenomenal people, named one of Australia's 50 greatest explorers. And all of this stuff, to me, I'm just a normal Aussie kid. I still am. If I was any more laid back, I'd be lying down. But it was this moment that made me realize that my life had taken a unique pathway, and that was standing face to face with Prince William and having a discussion with a royal, being invited to meet the royals. That was the moment that I realized that my life had taken a unique turn and something pretty incredible had happened. I also met Prince Harry last year, and the same feeling. When we have something like that happen, it's a little bit of a post in the ground, a flag in the ground to say, remember this moment. But it was that night that I realized I was actually just a normal Aussie kid, because I didn't want to eat any of the funky food at that reception. It was all caviar and this and that, whatever. I ended up in that suit at a KFC after that event. I met Prince William, and then I went to KFC. I'm the only one. They are cleaning the floor underneath my feet, and I'm sitting there in this suit eating my KFC. And that's when I realized I was a normal Aussie kid. But life for me was great. It was fantastic. In a split-second moment, everything changed. And whether it's a crisis, a pandemic, or anything that happens in our lives, we all experience change. For me, it was pretty brutal. I went to work. My job was to fly a vintage biplane up and down the coast of Australia, built in the 1930s, a tremendous, beautiful little aircraft. And my job was to just take one passenger at a time flying. We do some aerobatics. We go and look at the beaches and the waves and the dolphins, and it was a tremendous job. And I jumped in the airplane on the 28th of December 2015. No oceans to cross, no records to break. It was merely just my journey at work, my day at work. And the gentleman who jumped in the front was also a pilot, very nice man, very, very nice man. We talked for a long time before we jumped in the airplane. We went to the end of the runway and I took off. Just a normal day. And the airplane lifted off the ground. The runway disappeared beneath the nose. We were taking off out of a grass airstrip. And I soon found myself climbing out over the trees ahead of that runway when the engine failed. What followed was I pushed the nose forward. I did everything I possibly could in the 3 or 4 seconds that I had before it was all over. But where it happened and that entire scenario, despite what were my best efforts, what resulted was a horrific plane crash. And not just a horrific plane crash, but one where I was cut from the wreckage. I was put in a helicopter and I was flown to hospital as the only survivor. Finding myself operated on that evening from head to toe. I am titanium from head to toe. I had 5 breaks in my back, a shattered right ankle, a shattered face. I had cuts and bruises all over my body. But when I woke up, I had no movement or feeling from my waist down. I felt as if I had the weight of a concrete block holding my bottom half of my body to the bed. And I was diagnosed a complete paraplegic. In that split-second moment, everything had changed. The very thing in my life that had been my passion, that I was known for, was now the passion and the very thing that changed everything and took it all away. And the next 6 months in hospital, the next 1.5 years in rehabilitation, and the 4.5 years to this point, right this second, talking to you guys, has been an unbelievable learning journey and an unbelievable opportunity, believe it or not, to compare unbelievable highs, experiencing those highs in life, those moments that we just standing face to face with a royal or breaking a world record, that unbelievable kind of level of success that so many of us strive for, to have experienced that at 19 or 20, but then at 21 being admitted to a spinal cord rehabilitation ward and diagnosed a paraplegic, to have that high and that low by such a young age, although it didn't seem it at the time, it was an opportunity to compare, an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to study and dig deep and ask the question, where do we learn? Where do we grow? Where do we develop as humans, whether it be in our private and our personal life or our professional life? What I learned from that was that we develop in the bad times. And as great as the good times had been, it was learning to walk again. It was learning to drive, learning to fly. It was that entire journey through rehabilitation, not to mention then living with all the permanent damages I have. I walk like I've had too many Tennessee whiskeys, Coz, and that's sometimes the case. But I have so much wrong with me still, and I am walking. But for example, all your internal systems don't work, and I have no calf muscles and no glute muscles. But it's finding a new normal amongst adversity and change that allows us, with the right tools, to build a better future and to be more resilient and more ready and confident in our ability to overcome the tough times that we are all guaranteed to experience in life.
I'm amazed at what you've been able to do solo. Now, I recognize there's no way you flew around the world truly by yourself. But at the end of the day, you were the pilot in command flying left seat. Nobody could bail you out. As you've overcome adversity, sure, you have physical therapists, you have doctors, you have other medical professionals that have helped you. But in the end, you have had to do the work. What have you learned about yourself through all of that?
One thing I've learned is I never say I. I had a lady pull me up the other day halfway through a keynote, and she said, "Why do you say we? We took off, we landed, we broke this, we did that." And she said, "You were in the airplane on your own, right?" And I said, "Yes, I was. But this was a team effort. It is a we element to all of this, including the round the world flight and including my time throughout hospital. I had the individuals who'd supported me through the round the world flight standing by my bedside. And that was an incredible part of my recovery and success in life in general. And it is something we all need. We need that support network. However, at the end of the day, you are right. I always say life is won and lost above your shoulders. You can have the greatest support network in the whole wide world, but it's what happens from here up. It's the tools that you have in your mindset toolbox, the ways of thinking, the tips, the tricks, the strategies that you use to work through those tough times. Part of the strategy that you may have day to day, that becomes the team you have around you. That they are part of your mindsets, and that's where you gather and grab all of these tools, tips, and tricks. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that having a change and challenge ready mindset is not only a learned but a constantly refined skill. And it's one that we all need to work on, because you just never know what's around the corner. We are all in a position where we will experience some tough days. So we need to make sure we're ready for them. That's for sure.
I am glad we don't always know what's around the corner, or we might not take that first step, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, everything can change in an instant. Our best preparations, our best mindsets can be upset very quickly. What else is in your mindset toolbox that you talk about?
We tackle this in two elements. We talk about the mindset toolbox and we talk about the 3-step checklist to navigating change. When I was in hospital, I had a whole bunch of people, that support network, at my bedside, constantly providing me advice and suggestions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whether it was my mum, my dad, my brothers, friends, other family, whether it was the hospital staff, doctors, nurses, or whether it was complete strangers who had read Born to Fly or been a part of the round the world flight. I had all these people who wanted to provide me advice, ways of thinking that may help me climb the mountain that was in front of me. As good as that was, and as I mentioned, as important as it was to have that element in your life, it was overwhelming. And I found myself just at capacity. I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I didn't know which one of these suggestions to grab hold of and to move forward with and to focus on. I was a deer in the headlights. I was in the spinal rehabilitation gym, the place where we worked every single day, 2 sessions to build our body back up to its maximum potential. I was in that gym the very first day that I was wheeled in there in the wheelchair. I was in the gym, laid out on a bed, doing some exercises. My first challenge that day was to learn to roll over. And I was halfway through rolling over for the very first time, and my back was just screaming in pain, so I stopped. And I looked through a small hole created by my right elbow, and what I saw through that hole changed my entire way of thinking forever. And it's my favorite story to share as a speaker. Through that hole, I saw a young guy in a really big wheelchair. His name was Ben. He was a quadriplegic, and he had slipped over mopping his girlfriend's floor and hit his head. He had broken his neck. He had no movement or feeling below his chest, very little movement in his arms or his hands. And Ben was just sitting there in the wheelchair, and he was just moving his hands in and out ever so slowly. And that was his exercise for the day. Here I was lying on the bed trying to learn to roll over. I was feeling sorry for my situation as a whole, the fact that I couldn't fly, let alone walk, let alone go to the bathroom like a normal person. I was in a really bad spot. But when I looked at Ben, I felt like the worst human on the face of the planet, because I could see it in his eyes, what he would have given for just one chance at rolling over. It changed everything. It was perspective in its toughest, most realistic form. And when they wheeled me back to the rehabilitation ward and they put me in bed, my body was resting, but my mind was just racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I could not get that moment with Ben out of my head. It was that night that I realized that I needed to take all of these thoughts that were whizzing around my mind, that were leading me to the feeling of being overwhelmed. And I needed to find a way to place them in a organized toolbox. I needed a way to take all of the confusion and turn it into clarity. That's where the mindset toolbox was born. And it is an unbelievably simple concept. You can see the toolbox there. This is one of the worksheets we use every day. The whole idea is that we take all of these little life moments, easily forgettable moments, whether it's a moment with Ben or whether it's something that a doctor says to you or something you hear on a motivational video on YouTube. You take those moments, you convert them to tools that you can use to navigate change, challenge, crisis, and adversity, and you place them in your mindset toolbox. Now, that toolbox is yours. You take it with us wherever you go in life. You have that toolbox with you. By taking a moment, converting it to a tool and placing it in that toolbox, we take that easily forgettable moment and we place it in an unforgettable drawer. Building my mindset toolbox became my focus of spinal rehabilitation. Yes, I had to walk, and yes, I wanted to learn to fly again and do all of that stuff, but it was the tools in my toolbox that allowed me to do that. And I even went as far as going back to the round the world flight, pulling apart stories from that time of my life, converting those to tools and placing them in the toolbox. In the 6 months in hospital and the 1.5 years in rehab, I learned so much that toolbox was overflowing. I just had so many tools. I teach organizations and individuals to first build your mindset toolbox. You have to have a way to take the confusion, turn it into clarity. You have to have a set of tools, mindsets, tips, tricks, and strategies that you can draw from whenever you need to get through whatever you are up against. But it was the bigger picture for me, finding a new career and, getting back into the seat of an airplane and eventually learning to fly helicopters from scratch as an incomplete paraplegic, that made me realize that even though we may have a full mindset toolbox, as good as that is, in a moment of change, a true in the moment feeling of stress and worry, anxiety and fear, it's hard to reach into an even full toolbox and pull out just the right tool that you need to get through that moment. That's why I took my 3 favorite tools and turned them into the 3-step checklist for navigating change. Those 3 steps, gratitude, confidence, and resilience. That's my 3-step checklist. We teach individuals and organizations to find gratitude, confidence, and resilience, not in order to solve their problems, because there is no one gold nugget that's going to solve all the problems in this world right now. If there was and I knew it, I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be in my yacht in the Mediterranean sipping a margarita. But this checklist, although it wouldn't solve all your problems, placed you in a more change and challenge ready state of mind, in a position where you could overcome whatever the challenge is in front of you with greater ease, as opposed to just having that mind that was cluttered and full and confused. So the mindset toolbox, unbelievably important. You have to have one, you have to fill it. But the 3-step checklist, that systematic approach, that little kind of piece of wisdom that you can apply every time you're having a rough day, that has been the culmination of a lot of tools. My 3 favorite, to be specific, but that has been something that we are now seeing constantly implemented, and it really is changing the way people see change, challenge, crisis, and adversity.
For those who have never flown in a small single-engine plane, let alone piloted one, talk about the importance of the pre-flight checklist and why you're calling this the 3-step checklist.
100%. We definitely lead in when we do a session with an organization. Before we dive into that checklist, we talk about the why behind the checklist culture. As a pilot, when something goes wrong, when a warning buzzer sounds or a red light flashes, we don't just start flicking switches and pulling random levers, despite what, say, Hollywood may say. There is a systematic approach to work through to hopefully find a solution, and that is in the form of a checklist. So every aircraft has an aircraft type specific checklist. In that checklist is a whole section of, say, emergency procedures, a whole list of potential situations, all predetermined, with a whole list of step-by-step actions that will hopefully lead to a solution. So you work through every one of those typical checklists, work through every step, don't skip any, make sure you get it done before you get to the next one. And by the time you get to the end of that checklist, hopefully you have found a solution. I had grown up using a checklist in an aircraft. I knew it was such a fine, systematic approach to not only having kind of a uniform approach to day-to-day flying, but a phenomenal asset to help you get through an emergency situation in an aircraft. I wanted to build a checklist, but it wasn't going to be a checklist for an airplane. It was going to be a checklist for life. That is why we chose the 3-step checklist to navigating change. I wanted a simple approach that we can apply at any given time, any day, anywhere. It doesn't matter whether you're 15 years old and your prom was just cancelled, or whether you are 70 years old and you're a CEO of a company and you are up against the largest merger that you've ever had in your life. Gratitude, confidence, and resilience are a phenomenal basis to being able to tackle some pretty huge challenges.
How did gratitude make it to the top of your list?
Gratitude came from Ben. So Ben, in that spinal ward, that moment, when I truly went back to that hospital bed that night after I met Ben, after I realized what he would have given for just one chance at rolling over, when I found myself creating the mindset toolbox, I mean, that was phenomenal. That's what come from that moment with Ben. But I also found myself unpacking the very first moment in my life into that toolbox, converting it to tools, placing it in an unforgettable drawer. And that was that moment with Ben. What he had taught me, yes, it was perspective. Of course it was. You know, that was at the surface level, what he had taught me. When we unpacked it, it was that process of unpacking that moment in time that allowed me to truly dig deep and see a whole bunch of other potentially hidden and easily forgotten lessons. Ben had shown me that I needed to be thankful for the physical ability that I had remaining as opposed to what I had lost. Yes, I could not move anything from my waist down at that point in time, but I had arms. I had strength in my core. I had the ability to adapt. And whether I liked it or not, Ben was telling me that. He had shown me that I was, in fact, lucky to be a paraplegic, something that I never thought I would ever say, and I'm sure no one out there would ever imagine themselves saying, but I was lucky to be a paraplegic. Ben had shown me gratitude. When we put that 3-step checklist together, we knew gratitude had to be number one, because it's gratitude that allows you to change the size of the mountain that you have to climb, the mountain that's in front of you, that challenge. Gratitude allows you to shrink that mountain and change your perspective on that entire challenge you are up against before you even begin to navigate it. So what a better time to be able to help out. If I did not have gratitude at the beginning of my time in spinal rehab and all the way through to walking and flying, and even here in the States, as a keynote speaker, if I didn't have gratitude in those early days, this would have been a much, much harder journey to navigate. And I'm not sure I would have ended up where I am today without it.
The attitude of gratitude was your game changer.
It was, and it allowed me to
every day.
100%. And it allowed me to find myself in a position of thankfulness, of gratitude, to then sit back and say, well, what's step 2? What's step 3? Step 2 is confidence. We have to be confident in our ability to navigate the challenge ahead of us. And we find that through not knowing every step of the journey to a resolution, solution, or an end goal. We want to know every step. We would love to know when COVID will be over. I would love to know when I can go back home to Australia. I would love to know a lot of things right now, but that's just not how the world works. We must find confidence in our ability to navigate the challenges we are up against by locking in the next step. It was a lesson taught to me, and there's a whole story behind it, a guy called Andrew, a lesson taught to me in the planning stages of the round the world flight. But we have to find confidence by locking in the next step. Jump out, have a look at the big picture, see where you are, see where you want it to end up, but then zoom back in, lock in the next step, and get to work. It was a round the world flight story that I lent on heavily. As you can imagine, locking in the next step, just taking that next step, is an unbelievably important lesson when it comes to learning to walk again.
Well, and your map from earlier is a great example of that. You didn't go from the southeast coast of Australia around to the west coast of Australia. One leg, one day at a time.
Yes, and unbelievably important to make sure that we don't become overwhelmed. And as a pilot at 19, I could have easily become overwhelmed, and there were days when I did. But that was not necessarily a round-the-world flight. It was 34 legs from A to B. So I had to wake up, and I had to get myself that airplane. I had to get it to the next location, and I had to stop. I would take the next day off. I'd reset, I'd refuel, I'd repack, and I would jump back in that aircraft to do it all again the next day. And it really was one step at a time. And I think at a point in life right now where everyone is overwhelmed, we have to find gratitude. We have to find something to be thankful for. There is always something to be thankful for. But we have to be confident in our ability. We have to have courage and commitment. We have to understand that this is all going to be okay. We just have to lock in the next step and get to work. Once you've found that gratitude and that confidence, the third step is resilience in this 3-step checklist. Resilience is unbelievably important because although we can have all the gratitude in the world and we can be confident, we can be working, we can lock in the next step, it's guaranteed that there will be more rough times on the horizon. So resilience is found by anticipating the need to adapt, by looking ahead from, again, where you are right now to that resolution, solution, or end goal, and accepting the fact that there will be obstacles along the way, obstacles that we have to jump left and right to get around. That's just life. And by looking at those potential obstacles, just like a checklist, by anticipating them, by starting to think ahead of time how we may be able to get around them, what we're doing is we're removing the moment of stress and shock when that obstacle actually arrives, if it does, but we're also taking those obstacles and we're just making them part of the process. If you can find resilience in your day-to-day existence, you are a superhero because life is tough and it is unpredictable. And there are people who go through life and have a great run, but there is, especially with our iPhones and technology, we have access to stories around us every single day, stories where lives have not gone to plan, and mine was one. We cannot control what happens to us on a day-to-day basis, and it may not be our fault, but we are responsible, and we hear this so often, we are responsible for the way in which we react. We have to react in a positive way. We have to be resilient, and we have to have a phenomenal mindset. We have to be able to implement that phenomenal mindset regularly despite what's happening in the world around us. That's what allows us to work through the huge challenges that we're up against and find ourselves in the Mediterranean on a boat sipping margaritas. Hopefully.
Hey, let's do that. Let's project that forward and let's make that happen sometime.
I like it.
Absolutely. At what point did you learn to fly a helicopter?
I was not a helicopter pilot when I had my accident. I was an airplane pilot, or an airplane pilot, as you would say here. And I had always wanted to be a helicopter pilot, but it was just a very unattainable, expensive, illogical decision to make. So I continued to fly fixed-wing airplanes, had my accident, found myself in my state of recovery, determined to get back to honestly flying airliners, which at that point in time, again, I was naive. I just thought I could come back from being complete paraplegic and walk into an airline job. But reality struck pretty hard and showed me that that wasn't the case. And although I am walking, I have a whole bunch of things wrong with me. And one of the issues in my body is I don't have what's called plantar flexion. So I can't push my toes away from me. I can't stand up on my toes. So although I can fly most airplanes, I can't put the brakes on when we're on the ground. So that means that nearly all fixed-wing aircraft now or airplanes are out of the question. It also ruined my dreams of flying commercially in airplanes. So I bought a little airplane. You saw it earlier. His name's Doug the Cub. We might be able to show it here while I talk about this. So this is Doug the Cub. Doug has special brakes that allow me to fly again. And now we purchased this aircraft, and that's actually the aircraft that allowed me to fly for the very first time after my accident. So we actually use my heels to push the brakes on as opposed to my toes, hence why I can fly it. That airplane was bought in Australia and now lives with me here in Tennessee. But I wanted to fly commercially. So this was the moment you can see in the video where I was testing out the helicopter pedals for the first time. That's Mick. He was so excited to see that I could actually do it. I ended up being able to fly helicopters because helicopters do not have brakes. As you can see there, they have skids. So I ended up going in 6 weeks from never having flown a helicopter as an incomplete paraplegic who couldn't feel my feet or the backs of my legs or where I sit to a commercial helicopter pilot. And that clip right there was my childhood dream taking place, flying a helicopter out of my mum and dad's front yard of our house that we grew up in. Now, to be a commercial helicopter pilot unrestricted was almost unheard of, and I had an amazing support network to make that happen. This is one of my favorite clips of all time, flying the helicopter with some family on board over the southern pylon of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, zooming across there, looking up at the Australian flags. You can see the smoke in the background. The Australian bushfires were just starting to ramp up. Flying helicopters was phenomenal, but there was a day where I was flying along, I landed, I jumped in my car and I drove to the shops to get some food to cook for dinner that night. And my foot felt funny. And that was odd because I can't feel my feet. I took off my shoe and I found it full of blood. And I'd had a rock in my shoe. I'd flown all day. It had eaten into my foot and it really caused some damage because I couldn't feel my feet. I had no idea it was happening at the time. So I ended up being admitted to hospital and I ended up back in the wheelchair for another 2 months. It was that 2-month period where I sat there and I thought, come on, Ryan, you have so much to share. You need to make that happen. And that's when I applied for a US visa. And 10 months later, I was granted that visa and I jumped on a plane and sold everything I owned except for Doug the Cub. We put the airplane in a box, shipped it to America, and I moved to Nashville in order to speak full time. So
another leap of faith.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 100%. There's a huge part of me that wishes I was a normal 26-year-old kid playing Call of Duty, eating Doritos, and maybe an accountant. I don't know, something I could but I'm not. And I think my parents probably wish that too.
Somehow I don't think you'd be happy being that person.
It's not how I'm wired, Coz. And, I know for a fact that I have been through, and I say this, I'm just a pretty humble, casual guy, but I have been through hell. But I've also been through some pretty tremendous experiences. So if I can take that high and that low and I can convert it to something that affects other people and deliver it in just a normal Aussie kind of way, then, that gives me purpose and it brings a little happiness to what was a pretty rough experience for a lot of people all around. So if we can leverage some good out of that and we can help other people get through their tough times, inspire and encourage, and we can get a whole bunch of people building their mindset toolbox and implementing not just a 3-step checklist to navigating change, but a checklist culture in general. We should have the largest companies in America and the world should be using something along the lines of the 3-step checklist to navigating change. You know, we have to focus on mental health. If I can sit here as a paraplegic and incomplete paraplegic now and tell you that learning to walk again, which was way harder the second time than I ever remember it being the first time, if I can sit here and tell you that challenge was not a physical challenge, but a mental challenge, that just gives you an idea of how important it is to build that mindset and that resiliency above our shoulders. So that's what I'm here to do.
So of all those things that you've accomplished and overcome, which one of those was, in a way, your greatest victory to date? Learning to walk again. What was it? Moving
so close to the Jack Daniel's distillery. It's like 40 minutes down. That is the highlight of my, it definitely, to fly again after that accident. And, you know, the first time I ever got in an airplane again, and we can just go into it for hours, but you know, that I was conscious through the whole accident. I remember every bit of it. I left the first time I ever left that hospital. I still had my hospital wristband on. I looked like an escapee. I was in a wheelchair. I had my bag of clothes on my knees and my crutches. I was just starting to get up on crutches at the time. I said goodbye to my mum, who'd never left the hospital in all the time that I'd been there. And I got in a cab. I went to Sydney train station. I got a train 1 hour north. I got out of the train and went up to a bus at night in the rain in my wheelchair, got onto a bus, and I went another hour north. And this is a challenge I wanted to do personally. And I went to the airport where my boss, who I was working for when I had the accident, was based out of, and they lifted me into the back of an aeroplane into a T-28 Trojan, and we went flying. And we flew back into the airport that I had taken off and landed at during the round the world flight for an air show. So still in the wheelchair, you know, determined to get back on the horse in a way and start to work through what I knew would be a whole long list of fears and demons in order to be able to do what I did yesterday. I got out of bed at 3 a.m. yesterday, and I went up with a buddy, and we flew 2 Piper Cubs, Doug and his Piper Cub called Kenny. So we took Doug and Kenny and we went for a sunrise flight and gained again an experience that is just this unique perspective of flight. And I am most proud of my ability to get back on the horse, as to say, but I'm also, a close second would be my drive to be here. Honestly, a long way from family and friends and home in order to build a speaking business and to share a message that I know that the world needs to hear in general day to day, but especially right now. You know, I think we need more stories of overcoming adversity, navigating change, and we need to know how to build a better future.
You are a remarkable individual. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
You are more than welcome anytime.
So much to glean. I'm going to have to go back and watch this video again and again and take more notes. I just think at every turn in your story, there are so many lessons that we can glean from that I don't think one listening to your interview today, one could truly understand the impact of what you're saying.
I think it's also, you know, I'm not Tony Robbins, you know, again, any more laid back, I'd be lying down. I'm just a normal Aussie kid. And this is, you know, I remember the first time I ever stood up to tell my family that I was going to fly around the world. I just broke down in tears. I actually said to them, for 9 months, I've been wanting to tell you something, because for 9 months I'd been planning the round the world flight secretly. And I cried and walked out of the room, and everyone thought that I was bringing the next generation of the family in, you know, 9 months on. But I walked back in and said, no one's having a child. I'm actually just going to fly around the world on my own. Public speaking was a fear of mine, and kind of being out in the spotlight was a fear of mine. That's not why I did the round the world flight. It's not what interests me. It's not what drives me. What I love is striving to be our absolute best. my favorite question to ask everyone, I've never asked this on a podcast or a video or anything, so this will be interesting. If there was a space shuttle sitting outside right now in the parking lot and you, Coz, could get on that space shuttle and you're going to go to the moon, you are guaranteed to get to walk on the moon. You will step foot on the moon. You will stand there and look back at Earth, but there's a 50-50 chance that you won't make it home. Would you go?
Absolutely.
Man, like my girlfriend thinks I'm crazy, but
No,
I would
absolutely.
high five anyone on the way out. You wouldn't see me for the dust. It'd be the fastest this incomplete paraplegic's ever moved.
Look,
I would love nothing.
there's no guarantee that I'm going to make it home from the grocery store today.
Yeah.
There's a
100%,
50-50 chance I don't make it home from my next appointment.
100%. I just that what that symbolizes for me of standing on the moon and looking back at the world itself, or if we look at Carl Sagan's The Pale Blue Dot, we could talk for hours about all of this. What I was trying to get at, and I always go off on these tangents, including space flight, was that I am just a normal Aussie kid. And, there is so much in this story that when we talk about it like this, we see all these different elements, the highs, the lows. And, that's the reason that we can do a keynote and a whole bunch of sessions and coaching just on the round the world flight. We can talk about just the accident. We can talk about just the process of writing a book at a young age, and all the spelling mistakes in that book that my nan can tell you every page number of every spelling mistake. But
I'll bet
a big story like this, I know, provides the fuel to sit down with an organization and say, what are your problems? This isn't about me. This isn't about my story. This is about Coz. This is about, whatever. We talked with a Fortune 100 company in the last 2 weeks, and we sat down and that's the questions that we asked. What's going on? Tell us about your day-to-day challenges. Then we can go back into, as you say, that large kind of web of stories and pull what we need to pull and deliver that to be able to help those people through that challenge that they're up against, because that's what we're in the problem-solving game, as you know too well, and we need to use our own stories and experiences to help each other. So
your future is bright.
I hope so.
And, of all the people to say, I hope so,
yeah,
you're the guy who knows so.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's it. Maybe that's, we all have our own doubts and insecurities, and we're all normal people. And I've met some phenomenal, amazing. I shook hands as a space lover. I shook hands with Buzz Aldrin and had a conversation with him. And, everyone around us who has ever done something remarkable, it's just normal humans. We all put our pants on the same way when we climb out of bed. And, and I do, we all have our own fears and worries. And, we can look at someone who's achieved and overcome and think, oh, well, they could do anything. But that's just not how the mind works. And
no, it's not. But the great thing that you have that many people don't have is a track record of a template.
Yes.
Right. A template of, okay, it was not one flight around the world. It was 35 legs. Mm-hmm. And so to build a business is not one fell swoop. There's no overnight success. It might be 35 months, 35 years, 35 failures, 35 something to accomplish the one thing. But to break it down into its bite-sized pieces is something you've learned how to master.
100%. 100%. And definitely 100%. You are right on the money, and I will definitely use that in the future. No, but it is being able to look back and be proud of our past and confident in our ability to move forward to build a better future comes from that template. And the template is not just the bite-sized pieces and the locking the next step, but it's the mindset toolbox as a concept. And it is the 3-step checklist, and it is the checklist culture that we can instill in organizations. We need systematic approaches. We need a uniform kind of umbrella over and above each individual in the organization, because every day is hard, and we all digest challenge in a different way, and we all have our own ideas of how to work through what we're up against. And we need to bring some kind of confidence and resiliency into everyday decision making when it comes down to this change, challenge, crisis, and adversity that we all seem to struggle with. It doesn't matter who you are in the world. So it's all about sharing that template, that template, and making it better every day. Well,
and to your point, we all have our stuff. And whatever is in the rearview mirror, whatever successes we've had in the past, there are no credit cards of success for the future.
No.
Right? We can't just say, well, in the past I did this. That doesn't play into our future if we still have doubts and fears. And I think it's a great lesson that regardless of what we've accomplished in the past, every day is still that one giant leap that we have to make every single day.
Yes. And never, ever forget that your mindset is learned, yes, but it's constantly refined. Until the very day that we're on this planet, it is constantly refined, and it is ever changing because the world around us is ever changing. So we have to be able to think quick, to swiftly overcome adversity and navigate change. And we have to think that the organization or the individual that has the ability to think the quickest on their feet during these times, they are the individuals and organizations that will absolutely thrive through moments of change and almost welcome them in a way, because it's the change that allows us to adapt and to be innovative and to move forward in ways that and on journeys and down roads that we never thought would be part of our life. And I am the walking, albeit crooked, example of that.
Stay away from the Jack Daniels distillery, will you? You can just fly over it.
I've done that. That's another story. We have done that.
I have bet you have flown over it and dug the cub many times.
We have. You have the door open. You can smell all the mash and everything that comes out of the distillery there. It's unreal.
That's great. Well, I tell you, when I get to Nashville, I'll look you up and we'll go fly.
Sounds great. I look forward to it.
I would fly with you in a heartbeat. And I tell you what, if I look outside and you and Elon Musk pull up in some kind of spacecraft and say, we're going to the moon or we're going to the Mars, and I might not make it back, I'm still going.
Well, as I will say to end, I will say that I am an Elon Musk fanatic. I just think he's a phenomenal human. And so if I rock up with Elon Musk, we're going to have a good time. I tell you what, I look up to that man a lot.
Yeah. And don't forget me when you hook up.
We'll be there.
Right. Make sure that it's a 3-passenger compartment. Ryan Campbell, an absolute pleasure. I'm honored to have spent this time with you today. And thank you so much for not only sharing your stories, but the lessons from those stories so we all can learn from that and become better versions of ourselves.
You're a champion. Thanks so much for having me.
As folks go to ryancampbell.co, tell them what to look for.
There is a whole bunch of About Ryan information, blogs, and little bits of content that you can dive into. But there is a great overview of the speaking, both virtual and in person, that we can obviously work with you to bring to fruition. So jump on there. You can contact me directly by phone, by email. We are here to help.
Ryan, again, thank you very much for your valuable time, and let's fly soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.